Well, hello everyone. Welcome to Civil Clarity Reports. I'm one of your three hosts, John Noel, along with Marty Espinosa and Jody Kirk. This is our very first podcast, and hopefully, what will be one of many podcasts. And we'll be discussing cancel culture, politics, everything related to those topics. Our very first guest is Mitchell Gray, and I'll allow Marty to introduce Mitchell. Marty.
Okay, Mitchell is a friend of mine that I met at Our Lady of Lebanon Catholic Church. Mitchell's a lawyer in Oklahoma City. He's got a military background. He's got the oil and gas background. He has written two books, Mitchell.
Well, four.
And one is on Lebanon. Very good book. He knows about the southern border that we have, narcotics, many other topics. You can give us a little bit about the border situation?
Okay, yeah.
I know you've been involved in that.
Yes. And that's at least geographically closer. I wrote a book. I've got two books that kind of deal with border issues. One is called The Border Zone, which is about law and policy. And, it's kind of an eclectic book about the border, looking at the border from many different areas. I was lucky because I've been mentored by probably, one of the top academic border experts, Dr. Guadalupe Cabrera Correa. And she herself is from Mexico, and she's a professor at George Mason. She wrote a book that I think every American should read called Los Zetas, Inc. And this is explaining how modern, what we call drug cartels, which is not really a proper word to describe it, but everybody uses that in the vernacular, so you continue to use it. But this helps describe so people will understand how these cartels are really operating, because this is no longer just, hey, we've got Jose and some guys and they're going to haul some marijuana or some pills across the border. I mean, we're talking about very sophisticated multinational type corporations that literally have taken over land. They've intertwined with the government, and they're corrupting both sides of the border. People would be shocked if they saw how much corruption was on this side of the border, and it's getting worse. The border policy since the guy who's claiming to be president now, since 2020, for instance, in Oklahoma, the Attorney General just released a report. Fentanyl overdoses are up 484% since 2020. This stuff pours across, and it's facilitated by our trade policies and by our border policies. So it's just maddening to me. I think it's the number one issue. I'm surprised that there's not people in the Senate and Congress rolling up their sleeves and screaming and yelling and literally asking people to go outside and duke it out over this issue, because this can't go on. A country that doesn't respect and take care of its border isn't long for this world. And we just sit back and we allow it. The founding fathers, if they were looking down on this, would be shaking their heads and say, well, they deserve their own fate. So it's something that's got to be addressed.
One has to ask, how many of those that are up there won't roll up their sleeves because they're involved in this? It's amazing that the ACLU will not tell you where they get their funding from. And the more the cartels end up in the state I'm in, it seems like the ACLU runs to their defense.
What state are you?
Politicians do the same. So,
what state are you in?
New Mexico.
Okay, yeah. Well, I love, and all my life I've gone to Taos and Santa Fe and always enjoyed New Mexico. And when I got deployed, we were down near, El Paso at Fort Bliss, and then over into eastern New Mexico down there. And yes, those, as you said, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Texas, the border, is ravaged with it. And you made a great point. If you read Dr. Cabrera's book, Los Zetas, Inc., you'll see how high this is. Amazing. And that's why people should read it. They need to understand you're not going to ever win a war on drugs until you go after the money launderers. And very quickly, you're going to start getting into politicians. In Mexico, you can't even be governor of some of the main states unless you have the blessing of the cartel. And my fear is this corruption is spreading into America. Now, I don't know if it's true, but there was recently a lot of reports. So sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire, about possible connections between the Sinaloa cartel and the governor in Arizona. Well, of course, she denied it. What would you expect her to do? Say, sure, those are my friends. I'm not saying it exists, but the fact that it's even coming up is important to look at. And I think at the end of the day, the money is so great that what is the number one thing that tempts people, probably more than anything, is money. I mean, it's up there, power, influence. So the money can do a lot, and they've got so much money that a lot of that is spent on corruption. If people will go and read the cases that have been in federal court going back to the 90s on these big so-called drug lords, if they'll read the facts in those cases, they'll see a lot of the corruption networks. Like NAFTA is a key looking at this, the North American Free Trade Agreement. Why was Bush and Clinton, these guys, they were selling that to America as a great trade deal. It's free trade. It's going to give jobs on both sides of the border. And that all sounded good on theory, but that's not what happened. But it was great for the drug trade as well as the Business Roundtable. So when you start peeling back NAFTA, you realize the United States knew it was dealing with what amounts to a narco state. I mean, it may, some people in Mexico would dispute that and say that they're not a narco state. But if they're not, they're at least in the discussion, of being one. So you have the world's largest economy on the border with a third world country whose number one export, is going to be these drugs. Well, we're responsible for some of that, right? Because we're the market. So we have to look in the mirror and say, hey, we want those drugs. And so that is part of the.
Yeah. But when it comes to our cartels here, the cartels have changed the way they do business from the time when I was a kid back in the 1960s to the way they do business now.
They sure have.
Cartels of the 1960s, if you went and you were going to hustle drugs for them, they would give you the drugs and they would expect you to bring back the money. And if you didn't bring back the money, well, they're going to hunt you down and they're going to do some damage to you. Okay. Well, nowadays they don't do that. They give you the drugs. And if you don't bring back the money, they come and find you and they find your family. And they give you the choice. You can either sign your parents' property over to them, or they're going to kill everybody in your family. Okay. And I know this from personal experience because I've had to deal with the Sinaloa here. They did the same thing to my father. My sister signed off my father's property to get her ass out from underneath the drug debt. And the narcotics are just the minor part of it. Right now, we got a slave trade that is outrageous.
Okay? You're absolutely right.
It's through the ceiling. We have people disappearing right and left. They're being taken to Mexico and sent off overseas. We got people from Mexico coming over here, bringing their kids over, prostituting their children on our sidewalks. And they're doing that so they can pay back the cartel for the trip to the United States. The cartels are into a lot more than just drugs.
Well, this is why I recommend the Los Zetas Inc., because the concepts that you're bringing up, those are in that book and people understand. That's why I said drug cartel is really an outdated term. They're transnational criminal organizations. They don't care about drugs. Drugs is just one way to make money. They're involved with avocados, soccer teams, beer, cigarettes.
About power and control.
And the reason I'm so upset with the, so-called president in this, atmosphere is kind of what you alluded to. I mean, it is an absolute fact, and nobody can deny it, that when you rush all these people to the border, the same people that are running the drugs are also running everything else, including the human trafficking. And as this gentleman pointed out, before people go across the border, they even write on their hands, information, and they've got their information, so they know where to contact them, their families, and then who they have to report to. In other words, that person, though they may not want to, has been basically shanghaied into doing the work for the cartel. Well, all the work will be illegal. So you're bringing the government is standing back and allowing people to come in the country, knowing full well those people are going to be committing crimes that will be hurting and injuring America. They know this. They know that they're, as you said, they know they're working for the cartels. They've got to pay off this debt peonage, and it's very, very expensive. So these people are going to be doing all kinds of crimes, from prostitution to drugs to stealing cars or whatever. So no sane country in the world would be importing a criminal class on purpose. And this really starts bringing up very critical issues. I'm looking at this as a lawyer now. People say, well, the federal government's in charge of immigration. I said, well, the Constitution doesn't say anything about immigration other than the federal government has control over naturalization. And that's because they didn't want every state to have disparate standards on who could be a citizen. So they made that uniform. And I tell people, it's not immigration. Immigration is a legal process on how you come to the country legally, as a student, as a visitor, or as an intending, immigrant somehow. It's a process. You fill out forms, you pay fees, you undergo inspections, you're inspected at the border. This isn't immigration. This is some species of invasion. And it is a criminal trade. It is a binational or even international criminal trade. Money is being laundered through the financial system, so guys are getting wealthy off that. And then they'd say, well, we need all this security. So our buddies who are now retired from the military or the CIA, they run security firms. We'll give them big, huge government contracts, but the bodies keep piling up. And the drugs keep coming in. As the late Charles Bowden, who wrote about this very nicely, said, it's not a war. It's not a war on drugs. It's a war for the drugs. He said they're getting cheaper and cheaper. He says in 10 years they'll be free. So our politicians are failing us in that regard, because it's, as the gentleman pointed out, this is more than just drugs. It has morphed into just the biggest corruption and criminal network going, and we're participating in it on all levels. Maybe not as deep as Mexico, but that's the path we're going down. And Marty, maybe
we're there. Oh,
I kind of look at it like this: we replaced Al Capone with the cartels. It's the mob all over again. It's just coming from South America this time.
Well, I'll tell you a little story. They've infiltrated us deeper than what you think. They are inside of our prisons. They're inside of law enforcement. They're inside of the DA's office in your local town.
Yep.
One time I was going to a federal prison in Washington to interview a cartel guy. When I walked in with my partner to the main lobby area of the prison, federal prison in Washington State, they have this big blackboard. The blackboard announces all the news of the day. On that blackboard, and this was with the permission of the guards who had been paid off by somebody, it was right on the bottom was said, so-and-so is being interviewed by the feds today. He was going to turn over information to us so that we could bust the boat that was producing dope along the coastline on the West Coast. He wouldn't talk to us anymore after that.
Yeah.
Because he knew if he said anything, he was dead. And the guards were going to allow that to happen to him. So this was a long time ago, Mitchell and guys, and this is happening to a greater degree now. Their intelligence network that the cartels have is incredible.
It is. Well, remember this, you mentioned prisons. This leads us to gangs. I went to a major cartel and gang summit in San Antonio last year for law enforcement. And the guy that is kind of that puts it on as a retired El Paso detective does a great job. and they showed the most gruesome videos. It made veteran police leave the room to show what these cartels are doing to people. I told my wife, I said, I would never tell anybody unless they signed a waiver what I saw. I mean, it was like the most, and I'm not, I'm a military veteran. I'm not that
It goes
queasy.
back to the depictions of the revolution.
This stuff is like, it's the devil would get nauseous looking at.
Well,
these people are just beyond evil.
They're using the same techniques that they used during the revolution. Basically, when we started the revolution, we caught a bunch of French troops, and we turned around and plucked out their eyes and cut out their tongues and cut off their ears and decapitated them and sent that down on one raft down the river to the French fort. They're doing the same type of grotesquity.
Well, it's at that level of depravity on that. But they use in this country a network of established street gangs.
Yeah, they do.
And as you said, those gangs have then infiltrated the military. There's, that is while this administration is worried about a bunch of National Guard guys that voted for Trump, they really aren't doing much about the infiltration of these gangs to get the military training. And there's just, if you Google and start looking at that, you will see that is enormous. Here in Norman, which has historically been, a nice college town, just in the last 3 years, the drugs and the crime, everything is skyrocketing here. It started with COVID because that became a magic carpet to usher in under and I warned people about emergency law, that do not support emergency laws, but we did, and the town has just changed dramatically. Well, I noticed about 6 weeks ago at a park that I used to take my grandkids to, the best park in town, it was marked up with gang graffiti. Well, it turns out a friend of mine, his son is an LA narcotics detective. And so I sent the stuff to him, and he said, yeah, that's a legitimate gang out here. And that's certainly a bad sign that they're marking up the territory. And it only makes sense because, like I said, the drugs are just roaring in here. It's a de facto border state now. Overdoses are up. Another indicator, using the Narcan is up. And so all that, so the fact that you have increased drugs always means you're going to have increased cartel, increased gang. They go together, and that means other crime is going to go up. So yes, this border problem, to me, I don't see how anybody cannot consider that to be, maybe the most important issue, more important than, worrying about Al-Qaeda right now. I'm not saying don't worry about Al-Qaeda or anything like that, but come on, you gotta look at the immediate problem that's staring you in the face, and it would be certainly down, on the border. Now, we know there's no easy solution. Nobody's going to come in 30 days. It's going to be perfect. It's never been perfect, but you got to stop contributing to it. You got to stop aiding and abetting it. First of all, I mean, at least put up a fight. That's always been my theory. I mean, don't just stand there and take a whipping. You might as well fight back. Maybe something good will happen. So,
I don't know, flamethrowers are a really good deterrent,
What's that?
I said flamethrowers are a really good deterrent, You
Yeah,
get them guys down on the border with them flamethrowers, I don't think they'll be running across quite quickly.
Well, the truth is, the States and Mexico government truly and sincerely wanted to end this problem, they could end it pretty quickly. I don't think either one of them has the will to do that, but we at least have got to stop fanning the flames. And then, Congress doesn't act, they sit there. So yeah, it's just frustrating, I think, for most us Americans to see the country unraveling in places like that, and that for whatever political reasons. And I just would say is it that important to you to get votes that you're willing to possibly destroy the country because these people will vote for you? Well, I mean, you're a horrible American if that's, if you're doing that.
That was my response when they turned around last year and had the guys on horseback, and they're out there swinging their ropes, and they turn around and claim that the guys were whipping the people coming across.
Right.
And I was like, no, if that was me, I'd be out there with a flamethrower going, I dare your ass to step into this. Go ahead. I'll flame your ass up and send you back lit up. I don't care. It's like, you guys should not be doing that.
You need to run for governor of New Mexico. And this, this does,
Good luck.
this does bring up an interesting point. I'll throw some of my legal, thoughts on this. This really brings up an interesting question. I was kind of getting into it early about the relationship between states and the federal government. The federal government claims this exclusive jurisdiction over the border, and they don't want states doing anything. But in my opinion, the Constitution is relatively silent on that. I know there's some Supreme Court cases in the past that have said that, but Supreme Court cases, all that is precedent. It just means they may be wrong in how they interpret it. I think that states could use what's called nullification if they actually believe that what's going on is unconstitutional. And I think that they could say, hey, we have a duty to protect the health, welfare, and safety of our citizens, particularly down at the border, but all throughout the state, and that we are still a sovereign state and that we can do that. And they're going to have to start standing up, to the federal government, on that and say, you don't have the exclusive right. You might have the exclusive right to determine visas and things of that nature. But what we're talking about here, the truth is, under the Constitution, the president's supposed to be faithfully executing the laws. Right. And I tell people, what's the most simple thing I can tell you? I used to practice immigration law. You cannot come into America unless you have permission from the government in writing and you're inspected by a proper border official. Right. Those two exist. So therefore, anybody that's not doing that is per se violating federal law. The president's constitutional duty is very clear if you can read English at a third grade level, and that is he is to see that the laws are faithfully executed. So my question would be to somebody under oath, is the president faithfully executing the laws passed by Congress? Well, the answer is no. So therefore, he's in breach of his constitutional duty. Why isn't he being impeached?
Okay, here's a question for you. Constitution does reference the Supreme Court, and it states that they are supposed to resolve differences between states. They're not actually supposed to be there to be resolving a lot of the issues they do today. They're supposed to be there resolving issues between interstate border problems.
Right.
Territorial courts
in the states. The other thing is everything is subject to the Constitution. So if Congress passes a law or if a city passes an ordinance, they all have to pass constitutional muster. Well, now the question comes into what if the Supreme Court makes a decision that's not constitutional? And that's where the controversial nullification doctrine comes in, because the Supreme Court granted themselves the power in Marbury versus Madison to be the final arbiter of the Constitution. But the Constitution does not say that they are. The gentleman alluded to what their defined role is in the Constitution. They gave themselves the role.
Right. So that's not legitimate. Okay, first off, we the people didn't vote for that.
A civil war that had a lot to do with that issue.
Right.
And if you go back and read, if people could go back and study history without being obsessed with what people are putting in their ear today about, fascism and racism, and take a look at things historically, they might learn something.
But my question is, each one of these states is supposed to be its own country. And the naturalization is to whether or not you're going to be a U.S. citizen, not whether or not you're going to be a citizen of a governing state. Right. So each one of us, as part of the colonies that has been expanded, is supposed to be its own country. So I am a citizen of the country of New Mexico, and I am a bridge to the United States, and they have sworn an oath to uphold that Constitution and the rights of the people here towards that Constitution, correct?
Well, there's a 10th Amendment for a reason, that all powers enumerated are reserved to the states. If people go back and read the ratification conventions of the states, the Constitution would never have passed if people put forth the principles of today. It was the understanding of everybody that though the government was increased by the Constitution, it was limited to the enumerated powers, and the states still maintained their sovereignty and everything else. It would never have been ratified. So we really, truthfully, we dwell in a very unconstitutional situation right now, but nobody knows what to do about it, because the power is all concentrated in Washington, D.C. So there's about 18 to 21 states attorney generals that consistently sue the government. Those states should probably start meeting more regularly and see if they could combine their economic and political power and get a little bit more leverage, because just doing it ad hoc piecemeal, you'll never be able to stand up to the largesse. And I'm talking about on critical issues of following our own Constitution. I'm not talking about doing something, that is foreign or outside the Constitution. Right. I'm saying preserve it. They're the ones that are not preserving the Constitution. They're the ones in violation of it. I would argue they're in material breach of contract, and you revert back to the Articles of Confederation if they're not going to live up to their end of the contract.
I believe they've been instituting a coup since Daddy Bush was in office, and it went to, we are now part of the New World Order.
Well, I know this. I've asked a number of people just this simple question. Do you feel like you're represented in Washington? I've never had anybody say yes. Now, to some extent, everybody's always felt like that. But I think more than ever, people are very serious. They do not feel that they are being represented in Washington. And this is no longer a radical fringe view. This is a very mainstream view. I mean, I was raised and I've conducted my life as a good citizen. I obey all the laws, whether I agree or disagree. I've served the country honorably in the military, including overseas. I've raised a family to do the same. I pay my taxes every year. I'm hardly a stray weed out there or some sort of radical. I believe in a Republican form of government. And I believe that the government is supposed to preserve liberty and to make decisions in the best interest of the country. And when they don't do that, I don't feel criticizing them is anti-American. And they want to kind of turn it to where don't ever question us or you're not an American. And I think that's as dangerous as anything.
That's because they're trying to become a socialist dictatorship.
Well,
everybody keeps calling this a democracy, and it's not a democracy. This is a constitutional republic as it was founded.
Well, guys, I think reached our limit here. So
yeah.
So thank you, Mitchell, very much.
My pleasure for having me. All right.
God bless.
Thank you.
Hey, keep New Mexico safe. I love going to New Mexico. All right. Good night.
Okay. God bless.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this first episode, inaugural edition of Civil Clarity Reports. We will see you next time.
Have a good night.
Okay, guys. Stay